At 9:02 a.m. on February 19, 1945, Corporal Tony Stein crouched in the well of a Higgins boat as it churned toward the black volcanic beaches of Iwo Jima, gripping a weapon that wasn't supposed to exist. The gun in his hands weighed 25 pounds. It had been assembled from scrap metal, likely during the months of preparation before the invasion. No military manual covered its operation. No supply chain stocked its parts. No officer had formally signed off on its design specifications. The weapon violated standard armory protocols, and Stein was about to use it to charge straight into fortified Japanese positions that had already killed 550 Marines in the first hour of the invasion. The gun was called the Stinger. Before nightfall that day, it would prove to be one of the most effective infantry weapons on the most heavily defended island in the Pacific. Tony Stein was 23 years old, born September 30, 1921, to Hungarian immigrants in Dayton, Ohio. His parents, Steve and Rose Brandulek, had emigrated from Erdevik in Austria-Hungary. Stein attended Kaiser High School but dropped out during his freshman year to work. He became a tool maker, learning his trade at Patterson Field and later working as a tool and die maker apprentice at Delco Products plant. Jewish kid in a Marine Corps that wasn't always welcoming. He enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve on September 22, 1942, knowing they were the first sent into battle. He wanted to prove something about himself and his family's loyalty to America. He'd been selected for the Paramarines, an elite unit trained to be dropped from planes by parachute. Though the Paramarines never made a combat jump, they received intensive training that made them among the most capable fighters in the Marine Corps. Stein was assigned to Headquarters Company, 3rd Parachute Battalion, 1st Parachute Regiment, 3rd Marine Division. He'd seen combat on Vella La Vella and Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. Shot 5 Japanese snipers in a single day during the Bougainville campaign. Knew how to move under fire. Knew how to read terrain. Knew the sound a bullet makes when it's close enough to matter. But nothing prepared anyone for Iwo Jima. The island was 8 square miles of volcanic ash and rock, situated 660 miles south of Tokyo. 3 airstrips. Strategic value beyond calculation. If American forces controlled Iwo Jima, B-29 bombers could reach mainland Japan with fighter escort. Damaged bombers could make emergency landings instead of ditching in the ocean. The island would save thousands of American aircrew lives and accelerate the strategic bombing campaign that was slowly strangling Japan's war machine. The Japanese knew this. They had fortified Iwo Jima with approximately 21,000 troops and the most sophisticated defensive system ever constructed in the Pacific Theater. 11 miles of tunnels, over 1,500 underground defensive positions, pillboxes reinforced with steel and concrete, artillery pieces in caves connected by passages that allowed crews to fire, relocate, and fire again from a different position, machine gun nests with interlocking fields of fire covering every approach. The entire island was a fortress designed by Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, one of Japan's most capable commanders, specifically to inflict maximum American casualties. Kuribayashi had ordered his men not to fire during the initial landing. Let the Marines come ashore. Let them think the pre-invasion bombardment had worked. Let the beaches fill with men and equipment. Then, open fire with everything. Turn the beach into a killing ground. The plan worked. Marines hit the beach at approximately 9 a.m. on February 19th. The volcanic sand was soft and steep, composed of loose black ash. Men sank to their ankles with every step. Tracked vehicles bogged down. Wheeled vehicles couldn't gain traction. The Marines struggled inland, expecting resistance, but finding none for the first several minutes. Then the Japanese opened fire. Machine guns from the high ground, mortars from concealed positions, artillery from caves in Mount Suribachi. The fire came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Marines couldn't see the enemy, couldn't identify firing positions, couldn't return effective fire. They went to ground in the volcanic ash, trying to dig in, but the loose sand wouldn't hold. Shell holes collapsed. Fighting positions filled in. Men were trapped on an open beach under fire from an enemy they couldn't locate. By evening of the first day, more than 550 Marines were dead. Another 1,800 were wounded. The assault was threatening to stall. Units were pinned down. Officers were trying to get their men moving, but movement across open ground meant death. The Marines needed someone to identify those Japanese positions, someone to suppress that fire long enough for the assault to continue. Stein's landing craft hit the beach shortly after 9 a.m. He was among the first Marines ashore from Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division. His unit's objective was to push inland, cross the narrowest part of the island, and isolate Mount Suribachi. Standard assault doctrine: get off the beach fast. Don't bunch up. Keep moving. But nobody was moving. Stein's platoon made it perhaps 40 yards inland before Japanese machine gun fire from fortified pillboxes stopped them. The fire was accurate and sustained. Marines were hit as soon as they stood up. The platoon went to ground. Men pressed themselves into the volcanic ash. Some tried to dig. Some tried to crawl forward. Some didn't move at all. Stein looked at the stinger in his hands. The weapon's origins trace back to several different Marines experimenting with the same basic concept across different campaigns. The core component was a Browning AN/M2 aircraft machine gun, standard armament on Navy dive bombers like the Douglas SBD Dauntless, and various patrol planes. The gun fired .30-06 ammunition at rates between 1,200 and 1,500 rounds per minute, 3 times faster than the standard M1919 machine gun carried by Marine infantry units. The AN/M2 was designed to be cooled by airflow at high speeds during flight. In a stationary position on the ground, the barrel would overheat quickly. The gun also weighed approximately 23 pounds without ammunition, had awkward spade grips designed for aircraft mounting, and no practical way for an infantryman to aim or carry it effectively. But the Pacific theater was littered with crashed and salvaged American aircraft. Thousands of planes lost to enemy action, mechanical failure, operational accidents. Most were stripped for usable parts. The AN/M2 guns were generally considered impractical for ground combat. A Marine private named William Colby had been among the first to experiment with the concept. Bougainville, 1943. Colby took an AN/M2 from salvaged aircraft wreckage, jury-rigged a bipod to the front of the barrel, and used it in a defensive position when his unit came under attack. The gun worked. The Japanese assault was repelled, but Colby's modification was crude. The spade grips were still attached. The weapon was awkward to aim and nearly impossible to carry while moving. The idea had merit. The execution needed refinement. The sources describe varying accounts of how the refined Stinger design emerged. Sergeant Mel Grevich of Mountain Iron, Minnesota, and Private First Class John Little are most consistently credited with developing the improved design that became known as the Stinger. Both were para-Marines who had been reassigned when that unit disbanded in 1944. Some accounts indicate Tony Stein, with his toolmaker background, may have assisted with or independently worked on creating his own version. Given Stein's documented skills as a toolmaker and the fact that he had access to one of these weapons, it's reasonable to infer he understood the mechanics intimately, whether through helping construct it or through maintaining it. What's certain is that by November 1944, as the 5th Marine Division prepared for invasion in Hawaii, improved versions of these converted aircraft guns were being assembled. The refined design removed the spade grips and welded on trigger mechanisms to allow the weapon to be fired like a standard infantry gun. Stocks were cut from damaged M1 Garand rifles and fitted to the rear of the receiver. Bipods and carry handles from Browning automatic rifles were attached. Custom 100-round ammunition boxes were fabricated to mount on the left side of the receiver, allowing one man to operate the weapon without an assistant gunner feeding belts. The modifications used non-standard parts and weren't approved through formal armory channels. If inspectors had scrutinized them closely, the Marines involved could have faced disciplinary action. But nobody scrutinized them closely. By the time the 5th Marine Division shipped out for Iwo Jima in January 1945, approximately 6 of these converted weapons existed. Grevich reportedly named his personal gun Betty Ann. The weapons were distributed primarily to Company G, 28th Marines, 1 gun to each of the 3 rifle platoons, 1 to the demolitions section, and Grevich kept 1 for himself. A 6th gun went to Tony Stein of Company A, 28th Marines. The question of why Stein received one of these rare weapons when he wasn't in Grevich's company has generated speculation. Stein's background as a toolmaker suggests he may have contributed to fabricating or modifying the weapons. His reputation as an aggressive fighter from his paramarine days may have influenced the decision. Or perhaps, given the Marine Corps culture of looking out for fellow paramarines, Grevich simply wanted to ensure one of these weapons went to someone he knew would use it effectively. Whatever the reason, when Stein hit the beach on February 19th, he was carrying a Stinger. Now he was on that beach with his platoon pinned down and Marines dying around him. Stein stood up. Standing up under fire on Iwo Jima was effectively suicidal. Every Marine understood this. The Japanese firing positions were designed to cover every foot of the beach with interlocking machine gun fire. Standing up meant exposing yourself to multiple firing positions simultaneously. The Japanese gunners had practiced their fields of fire for months. They knew the exact ranges. A standing man presented an easy target. Stein stood anyway. He needed to see the pillboxes, needed to identify firing positions, couldn't accomplish that from ground level. So he stood in full view of the enemy, deliberately drew their fire to himself, and observed where the muzzle flashes originated. His Medal of Honor citation describes what happened next. He gallantly stood upright and exposed himself to the enemy's view, thereby drawing the hostile fire to his own person and enabling him to observe the location of the furiously blazing hostile guns. After identifying the positions, Stein didn't call for support, didn't wait for tanks or artillery. He charged directly at the first pillbox with the Stinger. The Stinger fired at rates approaching 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute. That's 20 to 25 rounds every second. The 100-round ammunition box provided enough for roughly 5 to 7 seconds of continuous fire. Stein fired in controlled bursts, 3 to 4 second bursts, 60 to 80 rounds on target. The tracers reached out in an almost solid stream. The bullets hammered the pillbox firing slit, ricocheted off concrete, punched through sandbags, and found the Japanese gun crew inside. The enemy machine gun fell silent. Based on standard Marine Corps assault tactics of the period, Stein would have maneuvered to the side of the pillbox and eliminated it with grenades. He then moved to the next position. The official Medal of Honor citation states, "Determined to neutralize the strategically placed weapons, he boldly charged the enemy pillboxes one by one and succeeded in killing 20 of the enemy during the furious single-handed assault." The Stinger's extraordinary rate of fire overwhelmed Japanese defensive positions. The crews couldn't keep their weapons in action under that volume of incoming fire. This tactical advantage, suppression through sheer firepower, proved decisive in allowing Stein to close with fortified positions that would otherwise have been nearly impossible to assault. But the weapon's high rate of fire created an immediate problem. Stein burned through ammunition at an unprecedented rate. The citation notes, "Cool and courageous under the merciless hail of exploding shells and bullets which fell on all sides, he continued to deliver." The fire of his skillfully improvised weapon at a tremendous rate of speed, which rapidly exhausted his ammunition. The ammunition was on the beach. Getting there meant running 40 yards back through open ground under fire from other Japanese positions. As Stein prepared to make his first resupply run, he saw wounded Marines lying exposed. The citation describes his response. Undaunted, he removed his helmet and shoes to expedite his movements and ran back to the beach for additional ammunition, making a total of 8 trips under intense fire and carrying or assisting a wounded man back each time. The detail about removing his helmet and shoes speaks to Stein's tactical thinking. Every pound mattered when running through fire. The helmet weighed approximately 3 pounds and could slow him down if knocked askew. His boots, likely soaked from the surf and filled with volcanic sand, were slowing his movements. Lighter meant faster. Faster meant better odds of survival. He made that run 8 times during the day. 8 times running through enemy fire to resupply. 8 times carrying or helping wounded Marines to aid stations. 8 times returning to the fight with fresh ammunition. The official citation confirms this, making a total of 8 trips under intense fire and carrying or assisting a wounded man back each time. Marines on the beach began watching for him. Corpsmen knew when Stein came back, he'd have wounded men with him. Supply personnel had ammunition boxes ready. Other Marines started calling out to him, pointing him out to new arrivals coming ashore. The Stinger's sound was distinctive. The AN/M2's high rate of fire created a different rhythm than the M1919. Faster, more continuous. When the Stinger fired, everyone on the beach could hear it above the other weapons. The sound indicated Stein was engaging another position. Another pillbox was about to fall silent. Stein's platoon commander, whose name unfortunately hasn't been preserved in the historical record, began directing other units to follow Stein's advances. When Stein destroyed a position, adjacent units moved forward to exploit the gap. The battalion was making progress, not fast, not easy, but forward. The citation notes additional actions. Despite the unrelenting savagery and confusion of battle, he rendered prompt assistance to his platoon whenever the unit was in position, directing the fire of a half-track against a stubborn pillbox until he had effected the ultimate destruction of the Japanese fortification. This detail reveals Stein's tactical sophistication. He wasn't simply charging positions blindly. He was coordinating with armored support, directing fires, acting as both an assault element and a tactical leader. The citation's final detail about the first day reads, "Later in the day, although his weapon was twice shot from his hands, he personally covered the withdrawal of his platoon to the company position. Twice, enemy fire struck the Stinger directly. Once it was knocked from his grip. He picked it up, checked the mechanism, and kept firing." The second time, fragments damaged the weapon. He improvised repairs and continued using it. By day's end, Company A had advanced approximately 200 yards inland. That distance doesn't sound impressive. On Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, it represented an extraordinary achievement. The 28th Marines had crossed the narrowest part of the island, cutting Iwo Jima in half and isolating Mount Suribachi from the rest of the Japanese defensive system. The cost was severe. Company A suffered roughly 50% casualties that day. Half the Marines who landed were dead or wounded by evening. But the objective was accomplished. The beachhead was secured. Reinforcements could land. The invasion would continue. Word of Stein's actions spread through the division that evening. Marines talked about the corporal with the improvised machine gun, the man who charged pillboxes alone, the Marine who ran through fire 8 times to save wounded comrades. Officers heard the stories. Company commanders began asking about the Stinger. Where did it come from? Who made it? Could more be built? The questions led back to Sergeant Mel Grevich, whose own Stinger had seen similar action on Green Beach. The other Stingers with Company G had also been used to destroy Japanese positions. Every gun had performed. The high rate of fire was proving decisive in close combat. But the weapons were failing mechanically. The AN/M2 was never designed for sustained ground combat, without the cooling provided by high-speed airflow. All 6 Stingers showed damage by the end of the first day. Barrels warped from heat, receivers cracked from stress, bipods shot off, stocks broken. None of the original 6 weapons would survive the battle intact. But the tactical concept had proven itself decisively. Battalion commanders wanted more information about these weapons. Regiment wanted details. Division wanted to understand why an improvised weapon assembled from salvaged parts was outperforming standard-issue machine guns. The answer was straightforward. Marines had identified a tactical problem: insufficient suppressive firepower during assaults on fortified positions. The AN/M2's rate of fire addressed that problem. The modifications made it usable by infantry. The fact that it violated regulations became irrelevant when it started destroying enemy positions and saving American lives. Stein fought for another week. The 28th Marines advanced toward Mount Suribachi. The 5-day battle to capture that volcanic peak became one of the iconic moments of World War II. On February 23, 1945, Marines raised an American flag on Suribachi's summit. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the second flag raising in what became perhaps the most reproduced photograph in history. Stein was there for the first 4 days of that assault. He was wounded on February 23rd, the same day as the famous flag raising. The official records indicate he suffered wounds and was evacuated to a hospital ship offshore. Medical personnel treated his injuries and informed him he would be sent back to Hawaii for recovery. Stein had different plans. His regiment was still fighting, still taking casualties. The battle for Iwo Jima wasn't finished. While the exact date isn't specified in all sources, Stein left the hospital ship and returned to his unit, apparently without official authorization. The 28th Marines had moved to the west side of Iwo Jima and were assaulting Hill 362A, a heavily fortified position in the island's northern sector. The fighting was more intense than anything on Suribachi. The Japanese had constructed an integrated defensive system where every position supported multiple others. Every advance cost lives. Every yard of ground was paid for in blood. Company A was pinned down by a Japanese machine gun position. The gun was in a covered emplacement with good fields of fire. The company couldn't advance, couldn't effectively flank the position. They needed someone to locate it precisely so supporting arms could destroy it. On March 1, 1945, Stein volunteered to lead a 19-man patrol to locate that machine gun emplacement. This was a reconnaissance mission. Move forward under cover, identify the position, mark it for supporting fires, return with the information. Stein took point, led the patrol forward approximately 50 yards, spotted the machine gun emplacement, and was marking its location when a Japanese sniper fired from a concealed position. The bullet hit Stein in the head. Death was instantaneous. He was 23 years old, had been in combat on Iwo Jima for 11 days. His body was recovered by the patrol and returned to Company A's lines. He was initially buried in the 5th Marine Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima, in Plot 5, Row 6, Grave 1107. He was later reinterred at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Hawaii. The Medal of Honor recommendation was written in April 1945. Initially, Company A's commander recommended the Navy Cross. However, a staff officer at division headquarters reviewed the detailed after-action reports describing Stein's actions on February 19th. The single-handed assaults on multiple pillboxes, the 8 ammunition resupply runs under fire, the 8 wounded Marines saved, the continuous combat without regard for personal safety. Based on these accounts, the recommendation was upgraded to Medal of Honor. The recommendation proceeded through Fleet Marine Force Pacific. Admiral Chester Nimitz endorsed it. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, approved it. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal approved it. The medal received 15 endorsements, reportedly the most of any Medal of Honor from the Iwo Jima battle. President Harry Truman signed the final authorization in October 1945. On February 19, 1946, exactly 1 year after Stein's actions on Iwo Jima's beach, Ohio Governor Frank Lausch presented the Medal of Honor to Stein's widow, Rose Parks, during a ceremony in the governor's Columbus office. She had married Stein while he was on leave during his para-marine service. After his death, she never remarried, keeping his name for the rest of her life. The official Marine Corps histories of Iwo Jima document Stein's actions. The Medal of Honor citation is preserved in the National Archives. His name is engraved on memorial walls. His story is taught at Marine Corps schools as an example of initiative and courage under fire. But the weapon he carried is barely mentioned in official records. The Stinger appears in the Medal of Honor citation only as a personally improvised aircraft-type weapon. No technical specifications, no description of construction methods, no credit to the Marines who developed the concept. The Corps never formally acknowledged that unauthorized weapons were used at Iwo Jima. Mel Grevich survived the war, returned to Minnesota, worked in mining and construction, rarely discussed the Stinger. When asked, he indicated it was simply something that needed doing. The Marines needed firepower. He provided it. Nothing remarkable about that from his perspective. Grevich died in 1998 at age 82. His obituary mentioned his Marine Corps service on Iwo Jima, but made no reference to the Stinger or his role in developing it. John Little's post-war fate is less well documented. Some records suggest he survived and returned to civilian life, but details are sparse. His contribution to developing the Stinger wasn't widely recognized until military historians researching improvised weapons in the 1990s found references in unit records and veteran interviews. The broader tactical impact of the Stingers is difficult to quantify precisely. 6 weapons among thousands used on Iwo Jima. But those 6 were at critical points in the assault, used to destroy fortified positions blocking advances. The Marines carrying Stingers became focal points for their unit's movements. Other Marines followed them, using their suppressive fire to move forward. One military analysis from the 1950s estimated that these improvised weapons may have been responsible for destroying 40 to 50 Japanese fortified positions during the battle, potentially saving 80 to 100 American lives through reduced casualties. While this analysis was never officially published, it remains in research files at the Marine Corps History Division. The fundamental lesson of the Stinger concerns battlefield innovation. When soldiers identify tactical problems, they often develop field solutions. Sometimes those solutions violate regulations. Sometimes they use unofficial equipment. Sometimes they modify weapons in ways manufacturers never intended. The military's challenge is recognizing when these improvisations work and institutionalizing the lessons learned. The M1919 A6 light machine gun represented the Army's formal attempt to create a portable, high-firepower weapon. It entered service in 1943, weighed 32 pounds, and fired at 450 rounds per minute. It was both heavier and slower firing than the 25-pound Stinger, with its 1,200-plus round-per-minute rate. The official solution proved inferior to the improvised one. Post-war American light machine gun development incorporated lessons from weapons like the Stinger. The M60 machine gun, adopted in 1957, was designed for one-man operation with a bipod mount. It featured a quick-change barrel to handle sustained fire and fired at 500 to 650 rounds per minute. The M60 became the standard U.S. infantry machine gun for 4 decades. Modern military historians studying weapons development point to the Stinger as an early example of user-driven innovation. When troops identify capability gaps, they frequently develop field solutions faster than formal acquisition systems can respond. The challenge is creating processes allowing these innovations to be evaluated and adopted without years of bureaucratic review. The Stinger succeeded because it addressed a genuine tactical requirement. Marines assaulting fortified positions needed high rates of suppressive fire to close with the enemy. Standard-issue weapons didn't provide adequate firepower for this specific mission. The Stinger did. The fact that it lacked official approval became irrelevant when it started destroying enemy positions and saving American lives. Tony Stein understood this instinctively. He carried the Stinger not because it was approved, but because it worked. When his platoon was pinned on Iwo Jima's beach, he didn't wait for orders or authorization. He identified the problem, employed the most effective tool available, and acted decisively. That exemplifies combat initiative. Assess the situation, use available resources, act without waiting for permission. Accept responsibility for the outcome. For Stein, the outcome included 8 wounded Marines saved, at least 20 enemy soldiers killed, multiple fortified positions destroyed, a beachhead secured, and ultimately, a Medal of Honor. And a weapon that wasn't supposed to exist became one of the most effective tools employed on one of the most heavily defended positions in the Pacific War. The Marine Corps still teaches Stein's story at infantry schools, still uses his example to illustrate courage and initiative, still emphasizes the importance of improvisation and adaptation in combat. Yet the Stinger itself remains largely absent from these discussions. The weapon's development is rarely explained. The fact that a Medal of Honor recipient was using equipment that bypassed official channels is seldom mentioned. Perhaps that reluctance is understandable. Official acknowledgement that unauthorized weapons proved superior to standard equipment raises uncomfortable questions about procurement systems and doctrine development. It's simpler to focus on individual heroism than on the improvised tools that enabled it. But in combat, effectiveness matters more than authorization. The enemy doesn't verify whether weapons are officially approved. They only care whether those weapons can kill them. The Stinger could. That made it more valuable than any regulation. Iwo Jima was secured on March 26, 1945, after 36 days of combat. American forces suffered approximately 26,000 casualties, including 6,821 killed. Japanese forces lost roughly 18,000 dead out of 21,000 defenders. Only 216 Japanese soldiers were captured alive. The remainder fought until killed or committed suicide, rather than surrender. The island's 3 airfields were repaired and operational by late March. B-29 bombers immediately began using them for emergency landings. By war's end, over 2,400 B-29s had made emergency landings on Iwo Jima, potentially saving approximately 24,000 American aircrew lives. The island fulfilled its strategic purpose, providing a forward base that saved lives and accelerated the bombing campaign against Japan. The cost was nearly incomprehensible. Roughly 1 Marine casualty for every 3 who landed. The bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. Admiral Nimitz stated that on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. That assessment was accurate and insufficient. The courage displayed on that island exceeded anything previously seen in the Pacific theater. Tony Stein's valor was exceptional even by Iwo Jima's standards. At least 20 enemy soldiers killed in close assault. 8 trips through intense fire to resupply and rescue wounded Marines. 12 hours of continuous combat, with a weapon literally disintegrating in his hands. The Medal of Honor citation describes conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, accurate and insufficient. What Stein accomplished on February 19, 1945, was fighting without regard for his own survival to keep his platoon advancing and his fellow Marines alive. He saw what needed doing, had the capability to do it, did it without waiting for permission, approval, or orders. That defines combat leadership. That's why Marines continue studying his actions 8 decades later. The Stinger itself is largely forgotten now. A few military museums display replicas. The Canadian Historical Arms Museum built a functioning reproduction in 2006 for a television documentary. Some private collectors own non-firing reproductions, but no original Stingers survived. They were used until they failed mechanically, then discarded. The weapon that helped secure Iwo Jima's beachhead exists now only in photographs, official reports, and the fading memories of veterans who witnessed it in action. That's perhaps fitting. The Stinger was never intended to be permanent. It was an immediate solution to an urgent tactical problem. Assembled quickly, used hard, discarded when no longer functional. That's how genuine battlefield innovation operates. Solve the problem immediately in front of you with whatever resources are available. Address regulatory concerns later, if at all. Stein, with his toolmaker background, would have understood that philosophy completely. He knew how to examine a problem and devise solutions. He understood the difference between tools that worked and tools that merely looked impressive in supply catalogs. The Stinger worked. On Iwo Jima's black volcanic beach on February 19, 1945, nothing else mattered. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.